Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt. You've reached Venus Unplugged. And what we do here is we explore the archetype of Venus in myth and dream, in story, in our lives. A lot of what we look at here is Jungian and philosophy and influence. What we've been exploring is the four types that Jung talks about. And it's very interesting because when you do start to notice, now it's very hard to grasp what type you are. So there's the intuitive, which makes those kind of quantum leaps. And there's the sensate, which is give me the facts, the engineer, nothing but the facts. There is the thinking, which is the logical process, and the feeling, which is what we value. Now, whichever is our inferior type, that's where we're going to have a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling. So when someone touches one's inferior function, you can definitely lose your cookie and not even understand why, or you just get completely, irrational and carry on. And what happens when we begin to look at this, just by observing the superior type, that's our go-to function. Then we have the two in between with the intermediate and then the inferior function. So we cannot go from, let's say, feeling and then jump to thinking, or thinking and then jump to feeling, because there's too big of a difference and too of a gap. We have to use the secondary functions. I know this is all jargon, to get to the inferior. But we definitely know we're at the inferior because that's where we are going to make our mistakes. That's when we're going to miscommunicate. And now, certainly you can read Jung's work on psychological types. There's a great YouTube by John Beebe, B-E-B-E. He's an early Jungian, and he talks about the types in a very kind of common sense way. Because this is hard at first to catch. But when you're also, it's a bit easier when we have an exchange with a person's inferior type, or someone exchanges with us and our inferior type, because we don't know what hit us. We don't know what happened. Why did I get so emotional? All the person said was, or we'll accuse somebody that then they're a thinking type, so they'll get accused that they're not feeling. They feel, it's just at a different time, at a different place than when you feel, because they don't. When you ask somebody who is a thinking type, well, what are you feeling? They honestly don't know. They need to think about it. They need to feel their way through. They need time, and certainly a willingness to fear, because that's the trick with the inferior type. We don't want to go there. It's like an empty space. In fact, it's not. It's filled with life force. It's filled with all the things from the collective unconscious, which is the primitive original consciousness, and our own personal. So this is big stuff to start understanding, or at least being willing to look at and observe in life, because it proves itself out in life. And that's how you know the archetypal energies are real. Because we see where the person will falter, or for sensate type, intuition or psychism or astrology, you're as mad as a hatter as far as they're concerned. Or imagination. Oh, those artists, they're just filled with fantasy. That's just, fantasy and imagination has no value, has no reality. It's just crazy, batshit crazy stuff to the very factual person. Now, that does not mean that they don't have that imagination, but that's not their go-to. And when they have to begin to imagine, let's say a sensei type, right, very factual, they're usually very good with money. Sometimes they're a little stingy, or sometimes they hold on to every penny because they know its value. But when they get an intuition, what will happen, because they don't understand the nature of the intuition, very often it will become a morbid fantasy, let's say about money, and that there's not enough, and they better hold on to every single cent because there's a great flood that's coming, and all money and facts will be wiped away. And you're looking at them like, whoa, no. But that's what begins to happen when people jump into a fantasy, and it's just, where is this coming from? The person is usually in their inferior function. So if you can step back a little bit and observe, is it thinking, the how? And if the think is all muffled, they're having a really, really hard time thinking this through, how to get there. A person wants to go to school, okay? Or wants to fall in love. They don't know how to meet people. How do you do that? Oh, I know. I'll get a website to do that. Okay, Cupid, or they'll tell you all these logical ways that you're going to meet somebody. But romance and relationships aren't feeling. And they really need to have a website for friendship. People that friendship is one of the most important. I was listening to something yesterday, and that people who have really good friends live longer and healthier. Not even so much about spouses, which I think that's why it's so important that one's beloved is also one's friend. And I thought, well, we move towards that relationship, and we have a collective belief that romance and love will complete us, which isn't exactly true, because what romance and love will do will rub on our inferior function. Because I had mentioned last week that, we'll marry or hook up with our inferior function, thinking, whoa, this is cool. This person's really, really good with handling money, and then I can be taken care of because I don't have to think about it. No, that does not last. That honeymoon's over pretty quickly. And then questions like, what's your financial score, come up, and a sensei person is not going to be thrilled if you have a low financial credit rating. It's not going to make them happy because it hits them in an irrational way. Oh my God, this person is this, then they're this, then they're that, then they're the other. So in noticing first within oneself, and then, as I said, the superior function, which is our go-to personality, towards towards the end of one's life, we shift automatically, or we grow into the inferior function, because that's the aspect of ourselves that has a lot of libido, has a lot of energy. So the intuitive type who just, makes these, has great imagination and makes these quantum leaps, may get involved in sculpting or get involved in using their hands in some way so they can touch it, they can feel it, right? And certainly spending more time on health. How do we keep our health? How do we keep our bones strong? And how do we, what can we do to contribute to making our health stronger? And very often that will include, let's say, exercise, which you never did before because you didn't understand the importance of the sensate and how it operates in our life. Now, just like emotions, we cannot call up a feeling. Feelings come up automatically. They're created. So you can't be joyful just by singing a happy song, okay? Or sad because of something else that happened in somebody else's life, or trying to make yourself sad. It comes up, it's created, it's authentic. It's how one really feels and how we value it. But if we don't know it's a feeling, is it angst? Is it anger? Is it very often people have been neglected. No, they didn't have a bad childhood. Parents weren't bad. Caretakers weren't bad. They just neglected them. Or, in another way, a feeling type is being cared for, let's say, by a sensate or a thinking type, and doesn't value feelings. So I'm going to ask you how you felt about that. Say the truth or dare or do it. So there we have the functions in early development, which certainly can give a person not just the impression, the reality of being neglected, because no one asked what your feelings were. What did you value? You didn't have a choice. Feelings didn't count. Doing your homework counted. Accomplishing, making money counted. We don't need your feelings or your imagination. So you see how important it is to start to observe this. Okay. Also, von Franz wrote a wonderful book about the inferior function. But again, it's Jungian, so it takes a little time to get used to that language. All right. Now, I'm going to read something here, actually, it's a general characterization of the inferior function by von Franz, and she writes here, if I analyze a thinking type, I never push him into feeling at once. I see the other functions at first assimilate to a certain extent. It is a mistake to forget the intermediary stages. Take, for instance, a thinking type who falls madly in love with a completely inappropriate person because of his inferior feeling. Very often at that point, clients will say, but she's so pretty. It's like, yeah, but she's mean. They don't see that because they don't know what those feelings are. Now, this is a simplex example, all right? So here's what von Franz writes. If he has a developed sensation which implies a certain sense of reality and of intuition, the capacity to smell a rat, he will not fall into complete nonsense. But if he is only a one-sided thinking type and he falls in love with an inappropriate female and has no sense of reality and of intuition, there will happen what is beautifully depicted in the film The Blue Angel, where the school professor becomes a circus clown in the service of a vamp. There are no intermediary feels where he can catch himself. He is just knocked over by the inferior function. But if his analyst, in this case, could see it, while he has not yet much feeling, that at least he has a developed sense of reality, then he can break the difficulty with the intermediary functions. So those are the two in between. I think that there is something to keep in mind if one is with also with an analyst, because if you're working with somebody and they're your inferior function, you need to be aware of that. On one level, it's going to aggravate you into consciousness, but on another level, you can feel at an enormous disadvantage because you just don't quite get it. Or on a feeling level, if someone says, well, just do it. Well, that's not going to help. Eventually, you might be able to get the person to trust their inferior function, which would be thinking, into a process or steps or how to do it. That's why we have so many how-to books. They don't know how. And that's not a fault. It's a function. So when we have more compassion for ourselves and for others, it's and also, what are we looking at in film? Being able to look at it and say, okay, what is going on here? Where you see two people arguing. What is really happening? Is this, the spirit of 76, everybody's deaf, dumb, and blind? What's happening here? No. Two inferior functions are coming together, and nobody knows what the communication is, and we just throw our hands up. Or we think it's either our fault because we go blank. Now, when we start looking at this stuff, it's very, very interesting because life is so fascinating this way. Whatever we put our attention on, suddenly, bam, people are asking us to do something that is coming from our inferior function, or just a minor. This morning when I was getting ready, and I thought, maybe I should do last night at midnight. And then I woke up and they're working on something downstairs, so there was all this noise, and then I noticed these lemons that I bought on Friday are all green, and my inferior function said, take them back. And I immediately went then I have to find the receipt, and then I got to pack them up, and then I got to, we're talking 15 minutes, and my inferior function is correct. Take it back. Don't waste money. And I think for those of us in that life's plan of inferior function, we won't take something back, or it seems like such a big hassle. It seems like a big hassle because it is not our superior function. Usually we'll just say, I'll just get another the next time, or I'll not buy that again. We'll keep it in the mental plane. But no, because my inferior function said, go get the receipt, which actually was in my purse, and I will take that back and listen to that part of me that wants to protect, doesn't want me to lose money, doesn't want me to waste right use of time and energy. Okay? So it's not comfortable, but it's true. And there's a lot of energy. This is why when we fall in love, and that helplessness that comes up. So yes, part of it is Eros shoots the arrow, but also the inferior function comes up, the helplessness. Or morbid fantasies. How is this going to work? I don't know how this is going to work. What's all this feeling? I'm overwhelmed. I never felt this before. And we call it love. It could be many things. It could be love mixed in with anxiety and morbid fantasies, or being taken away because we're so overwhelmed all at once. We can't gradate. Well, I just fell in love with a married person who's really not available, or a married person who's fishing to have an affair so they can break up their marriage. And do I want to be that person to help them do that, or the person that helps the marriage improve? There's always meaning, and there's always a subtext. And it's always fascinating, even if it is very painful. It's painful because we don't have any consciousness, any awareness. Or when we break through in consciousness, like I said, many a time in my practice, I see this kind of blue light flash, okay? And it's very often the blue, that specific blue is kind of a form of an awakening to enlightenment, right? And I see that happening. It's really quite extraordinary. They look like saints for a second. And then I know it's going to take them 20 years to come to terms with that moment. They got it, but now they got to work with it. Now they have to feel it and see its purpose, and it goes through the whole system. It changes our organs. It changes everything. The moment of the enlightenment, like falling in love, that moment, that bright light, that electricity, it hits us, but it takes 20 years to grow into it. So people keep striving, as they should, but they already attained it. They just can't take it in yet. And it's actually quite a beautiful system because, we say we want something, but the ramifications of consciousness, or the ramifications of love, or the ramifications of, artistic expression, these are big responsibilities. And so not only do we have the four functions, but then we have the extroverted and the introverted aspects of that. So, if your superior function, your go-to function, is introverted thinking, your inferior function, now follow the bouncy ball right here, your inferior function will be extroverted feeling. What does that mean? So an introvert is not shy. An introvert is a person who the object is within. They experience it within themselves. An extrovert experience has to get it out there. Okay. Be out there and be in there. So the thinking superior function, okay, who is extroverted, will go within, will remove themselves sometimes from the conversation, or remove themselves and kind of stay alone for the weekend to really think out, maybe write things out. What is it? How does this really work? How do I present this? Meanwhile, the inferior function is extroverted feeling. So if that gets triggered, they're bombastic. They're, primitive or infantile or screaming and yelling because it's got to get out there. Now that is a shock to who we think we are, which the inferior function always is. So that's why we need to, hopefully, with some understanding and some kindness towards ourselves, be able to recognize that great explosion, the person, and even though they think they're so logical with their arguments as they're screaming and yelling and they're giving you this logical, there's no real thinking function. It's just a series of emotions that they jumble all together, and then there's no communication. And very often, let's say in the case of extroverts, so in the extrovert, their inferior would be introverted. It's not comfortable for them. That doesn't mean that they cannot introvert. And very often when they do, because they don't visit that introversion so often, they have really, really very poignant, intuitive sense. But that's not where they're necessarily going to go. So in an introvert, very often their extroverted shadow distorts. So they're not always that clear. So they can experience something, but then bringing it up and bringing it out into the world is a whole other set of kind of rules, so to speak. So extroverts find it very difficult to grasp or, the conversation of the meaning of life or the symbolic life. They can be highly intuitive, but it's got to be out in the world. It can't. They're not interested in the inner world. And when something happens where they got to chill and really go within, it's very painful for them. And just like an introvert, because the opposite is true, but the introvert, has an extroverted sensate. They can come to the party, which they don't usually like to go to because they'd rather be within themselves, and be the life of the party and bring a great contribution to the party because of all that's cooking inside of them. So it's fascinating to begin to explore these types and how they operate, and especially this extrovert and extrovert, because that's the first thing we try to, and it's usually the easiest to identify. Very often a person, if they describe themselves, they really will think they got a handle on their inferior function, and that's the way they are, and you're thinking, like, no, I don't think so. I don't experience it that way. So first we notice, do you gotta live your life out there in the world, being, which is fabulous if that's who you are, or do you need to be off and alone? If we carry either one of them to an extreme, we can become obnoxious because we can't relate. We're always out there and yada, 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 and what's happening in space and what's happening in the world and what's happening on Facebook and blah, blah, blah. There's no meaning. You start to feel dried up, or you want to run from somebody like that because there's no inner connection, and vice versa. When if a person is too introverted and doesn't know how to get out of that when they're in relationship or conversation with somebody, man, you're in the swamplands of their soul. You don't like it. What is in here? So part of communication is understanding, wait, okay, I don't value that, but that person values that. And if I care about communication, and I also understand, wait a second, that's a part of me I don't know nothing about. That's virgin territory, and I need to, because the art of life is to have all of these functions, and that's what integration is. Integration is when there's enough consciousness that we're moving through the four functions in an integrated way. We're not choosing one over the other. We're not necessarily eliminating one. We can say, okay, my inferior function wants me to take my lemons back. The rest of me doesn't want to do that, but out of respect and love, because that's its job, to help me where I can't see something, I'm going to do it. The other three functions will be bitching and moaning, but I'm doing it. And I already found the ticket, so there it was, right there all the time. So start to observe this. I know it gets a little confusing with the feeling and this, but it's also very important, especially now with what's going on in the world. We really need to know what we're up to. Okay, so next week there will be, no, I'm not scheduled for a Blog Talk Radio. It will be the week after. Okay, cheers, bye.